Have you ever wondered what goes on behind closed doors at the California State Capitol in Sacramento, where your tax dollars go? How laws get enacted without a say from the voter? Who's really making the decisions?
Kind of predictable, but there's sometimes they're
Now,
fun,
for the
fun
record, I
surprises.
chose to interview a recently retired state official in the hopes of getting, you could say, more honest answers. Especially since theoretically someone who is now out of office is not going to be worried about getting reelected again, and therefore possibly has nothing to lose and can kind of be more uncensored, so to speak. Former Republican California State Senator John Moorlach, thank you so much for being here.
Dave, great to be with you, man. Again.
Thank you. I talk to so many Californians each and every day. So many of them are asking what goes on behind closed doors in Sacramento at the state capitol. The other thing they really ask me is, are you politicians running California, or in fact, are you ruining California?
Well, thank you, Dave. That's a great way to start
Yes.
conversation. I'm not so sure, if it's behind closed doors. I think it should be pretty obvious that obviously the Sacramento is run by Democrats. They have the majority. I enjoy being in the state Senate, and right now, out of 40 members, 8 are Republicans and 32 are Democrats. So it's pretty much a one-party state at this point.
Why is that? Why can't Republicans win in a blue state? Critics of California are saying that the state is becoming more and more progressive every few years. Why is it so difficult for a Republican to win here?
Well, I think it's because the Democrats are better organized, better funded, and they have a strategy. So if you go back to the mid-90s, you have Kurt Pringle from Orange County, who was the Speaker of the Assembly. And from that point on, we've watched the Democrats slowly target Assembly members and senators that are Republicans, and every 2 years, every 4 years, they pick one or two off, and so they've been very disciplined. The old phrase, "He who has the gold rules," and the Democrats are very well financed, and they're very disciplined. So when they go after a seat in Sacramento, they will run one candidate, whereas Republicans are independent, they're not disciplined. They will run a multiple number of Republicans because they're all got big egos and think that they should be the one that wins, and they split votes. And so we've been seeing the composition of city councils, school boards, all the rest, all the way up, turning more Democrat because of the lack of discipline. In Sacramento, I guess the closed door or behind closed door thing is that Democrats are told how to vote. And if they don't vote as they're told, then the Democrats can run someone against them. And I've seen that happen. So it's that discipline, it's that fine-tuned, and it's been very successful.
And for the record, and for our viewers, later this year, we are going to have a Democrat state senator sitting there with me, and I'm going to ask them the same questions just so we balance everything out. You also said something interesting at the beginning of this interview. You said the Democrats are running the Capitol, running Sacramento, yet constantly I'm asked by the Californians I interview, and I mean, we're talking each and every day, they still don't know who's really running the state, who is in control. Because you say the Democrats, but many think it's more sinister than that. There are some behind the scenes maneuvers, and the Democrats aren't even running things anymore. Can you talk about that? Because I don't know.
Okay. The elephant in the room are the public employee unions. And they fund the candidates. They fund 90% Democrats. So you have a liberal, progressive, leftist legislature because of the person or the entity that has the gold, and that is the public employee unions. I could only maybe speak to my own case. I certainly got up on the floor of the Senate and encouraged a no vote on the California Correctional Peace Officers Association's new contract. I quoted from the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is an independent watchdog for the legislature and said, look, they're making 40% more than their counterparts. They don't really need a raise. Well, the CCPOA, which is the acronym for this organization, the prison guard union, they spent close to $1.5 million against me to help my Democratic opponent. I raised $2.4 million, which is a whole lot of money for a state race. But the unions gave my opponent $6.4 million. So that's sort of how it works. So if I was ahead in polling, say 53-47, you spend $1 million, and now it's 52-48, you spend another $1 million. You spend $4 million, all of a sudden we're 50-50, and then he wins by just a narrow margin to become the next senator. And that was done against Democrats that don't cooperate with the unions. The CCPOA went after Assemblyman Reginald Sawyer Jones, and it sends a message to all the Democrats: you got to vote how you're told, or you will face repercussions. So yeah, California is a union state. It's a blue state, and it discourages good Democrats from running, who were little maybe independent thinkers, and it discourages Republicans from running because they know the onslaught that will come. Because the mail pieces in a campaign are not pretty. I mean, they will give you all kinds of labels that are maybe not accurate or true, but in that short October to November window, what do you do?
To be fair, much of what you say is true. That's just a fact. Many argue the unions do have a stranglehold on California and on politicians, thus a stranglehold on the voters. Yet with that said, I remember back in the day as a kid, even back in the 70s and 80s, unions were there to really get the backs of workers, both in California and throughout the United States. They got them the good health insurance, the benefits, the good working hours, the livable wage. You have a lot of critics who are union workers who do not like what you were saying.
Darn right. And, a union had its place. I mean, we go back in U.S. history when, employers were not compensating properly. I mean, to talk about an 8-hour day, to talk about Christmas time off or bonuses or other, health care, all the rest, that had to come with some battles, and that was a result of some greedy capitalists. Now we have greedy union leaders. We have in 1999 we had a bill, Senate Bill 400, which said let's improve the pension benefits for public safety officers. At the time, the formula was 2% at 50, which meant that they could get 2% of their salary times their years of service at age 50. And they changed the formula to 3% at 50. So, and they made it retroactive to the date of hire. So now greed and fear are the main reasons for doing things. Well, now greed is inside the unions. And so overnight, when a pension system was 100% funded and carefully maintained and properly administered, all of a sudden it became 50% underfunded. So it was just 2/3 funded because of this massive increase in the pension, which started with California Highway Patrol, then it went to police officers, then the general employees said, wait, like children in adult bodies, they said it's not fair. And so then they got a formula bump up retroactive to the date of hire. So now you look at CalPERS, the major pension system in California, it's 71% funded. You're already failing if you're not 80% funded. But the unions don't seem to worry about that. They rely on the investment returns. And if that isn't satisfactory, they will just tell the legislature to raise taxes. I mean, the legislature raised the gas tax without a vote of the people. They had the 2/3 vote. So it always seems to go back onto the shoulders of the taxpayers. Now, I was voted in as a taxpayer representative, and I negotiated hard with my employee union bargaining units, but that didn't make me very popular because I felt I didn't represent them. But if you look in the landscape, everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, that's an overstatement, but the majority of elected officials have received contributions from public employee unions. I'll give another example. When George Floyd was killed by a police officer, there were people in this state that said, let's see how many of our 120 legislators received contributions from public employee police officer associations. And they did the whole list, and I'm at the bottom with zero, and everyone else has received funds. So I made a policy of not taking money from unions, and I made a policy of trying to be fair for the taxpayer.
Then getting back to one of our earlier questions, then how did you as a Republican politician break through in blue California? How did you get your Senate seat in the Capitol?
I was benefited from very high name ID. You had mentioned that I predicted the bankruptcy of Orange County. That gave me international ID. Literally, I'm now in well over 400 publications. It's just, my name is out there. So that gave me that ability. And so I could, and I had history. I'd served 12 years as a treasurer, 8 years as a supervisor. And so I went into the election. I ran against the sitting assembly member, and I was kind of teased about the fact that I had no assembly required. I just went right into the Senate, the upper house. And but it took a boatload of money to get me out, and it was union money.
Speaking of money, and probably no better person to ask than you, with your CPA background, your financial background, and being a politician, Californians, by most estimates, pay more in taxes than any other American in the United States. The property tax, the gas tax, the sales tax, the business tax. I mean, facts are facts. It's insane. Yet California continually cries poor and the state has no money. I don't get that dynamic. Can you explain it to me? Because people are angry.
Well, they're not only angry, but they're voting with their feet. So when you have 500,000 people leave the state in the last 2 years, it should tell you something. When I was in the Senate, they proposed to raise the personal income tax rate from 13.3% max to another 5%, like six. It was just an amazing number. A bill should have never even seen the light of day. And we have no capital gains tax break at all. So when you sell your business here, you pay a big chunk of it to the state of California. So people leave. They've had enough. And why do we need more money? Because we have Democrats running the legislature with a Democratic governor, lieutenant governor, and they have programs that they want to spend. And so now the voters have to realize or take it a minute to say, are those programs effective? Why do we still have higher crime? Why are we still the highest poverty rate? Why are we still the most homeless people? I got a real eye-opener when I was making phone calls raising money, and I called someone who lived in Henderson, Nevada. And I said, your wife gave me $4,900 in my last campaign. I just want to know why. Well, John, I own businesses in Orange County, California, Nevada, Arizona. And my accountants told me that living in California was costing me $10,000 a day. So I bought this home in Henderson. In a year, he could buy a $3.6 million home, right? With the savings from moving from a few miles to Nevada. So things are happening and people are starting to realize it. I just don't think that we're ever going to slow down in raising tuition on college students that go to University of California or Cal State University, because the answer is always, let's just raise tuition, raise taxes, whatever it is, to pay for an incredible employment compensation package.
And just to be fair, later this year, again, for our viewers, we're going to have a Democrat state senator on to counter John Moorlach's argument. You do blame the Dems for a lot of this. However, to also be fair to the Dems, what would Republicans do differently if it was a majority Republican in this blue state?
Well, you still have to get to the root problem, and that is, what do we do with the funding source for Democrats, and how do we limit the ability of unions to be so involved in picking their bosses? So I would think that if Republicans were in charge, there might be a real focus on even reviewing the constitutionality of bargaining with units of all these unions, and whether or not they should have dues that would be used for political purposes. So that would be one of the first. Then you've got to look at all of the financial goodies that have been provided and say, okay, is this sustainable? Do we need to once again look at pension reform? At least Governor Jerry Brown did that. But he had lots of opposition from the unions. But we still have to do retiree medical reform, providing lifetime medical benefits to retired employees is very expensive. You have to look at what's called other post-employment benefits, OPEB, on the balance sheets of our municipalities to see how big the liabilities are and what needs to be done. So I would see speaking for myself, a more focused effort on trying to get government to be more realistic in what it provides that's more customary to what the private sector provides. Because the private sector is funding all of this, and there should be some parity. And then, of course, where can you cut? How many departments have been set up that are totally unnecessary? One of the programs that was set up when I was in the Senate is Cal Savers, forcing employers that don't have pension plans to do a defined contribution plan for those employees. And then you have to put it on your payroll tax return and send in the money. Well, that's a private sector job. You don't need to set up a whole bureaucracy with good pay and good retirement benefits to do that. So you'd say, okay, where can we start, trimming down government?
I'm out in the streets every day talking to people for this program, Sustaining Us, and whether it's the Inland Empire, Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange County, Los Angeles, everyone is flabbergasted at how bad crime is getting and how bad the homeless problem is getting, almost out of control, in disrepair. What can be done about that? And if I'm not mistaken, I researched some of what you had been working on in the Senate. Correct me if I'm wrong, weren't you working on a bill to try to get mental health help to people so that possibly that could curtail some of the crime or could curtail some of the homelessness that we're dealing with?
It's a big subject, but there was the Lanterman-Petra Short Act back in 1967, which said that we need to close mental institutions and then open community clinics. Well, they closed the institutions, but they never opened the clinics. So now you have all these homeless people coming out of our mental institutions, and where do they go? They go to the streets. So if you look in Orange County and LA County, the largest mental institutions in both counties are their main jails. So there's a correlation between mental illness and crime. They're getting arrested, they're getting put in jail. And so we've had Governor Brown, who was told by the federal government, you have too many prisoners and you need to reduce your prison population. We had the voters approve Prop 47 and Prop 57, which says we need to reduce the time or the penalties for shoplifting. It's like now we're seeing shoplifting. They bring in calculators and say, can we stay under $950? You're seeing stuff that is just we've never seen before, with gangs running into Nordstrom's and grabbing everything and running right back out. So there's a correlation between these policies that the Democrats have encouraged us to pursue, and now you're seeing the reverberations, the repercussions, and it's not pretty.
The other thing that people are telling me constantly every day is, with regards to crime, and I speak to many crime victims because we do a lot of crime stories, and or maybe it seems that way, the perpetrator of the crime, the way the criminal justice system is, they're now the victim, so to speak, and the victim sort of has no rights. The other thing they're concerned about is no cash bail, defunding the police, fewer cops on the streets, and even liberals who were very adamant in the summer of 2020 about defunding the police and the horrific killing of George Floyd, et cetera, et cetera. Now they're even sort of changing tunes and saying, you know what, the criminal justice system has to be tougher. There are liberal DAs who, let's say in the name of restorative justice or social justice, for lack of a better word, and that may have been very well intended and could have been very fair, but today the pendulum has swung so much that crime victims have no rights in this state, and crime is a big problem, John Moorlach.
And maybe to bring up a positive of what the 8 Republicans in the state Senate were able to accomplish this year, was SB 14, which was child trafficking. And when they wanted to increase the sentence for child trafficking, the Democrats turned it down in committee. And the Republicans did enough PR, enough outrage to say, wait a second, that this is crazy. You're not going to increase penalties for even child trafficking. What does that say about you as a party? And they embarrassed them enough to get the bill through both houses, and Governor Newsom signed the bill. So there's a little bit of a victory, but taxpayers are frustrated. They signed enough signatures to put a ballot measure on next year's ballot, which would increase the penalty for fentanyl dealers. We have so many young people dying of fentanyl overdoses. Yeah. And that was tried by Senator Pat Bates, Republican, every year I was in the Senate, to get increased penalties, to get some more enforcement, because we're seeing fentanyl deaths. You know, it's a shocking graph year by year. And so the taxpayers are at least saying, hey, time out. We need to do something to improve the penalties, because all these DAs are just letting everybody off, and they're back on the streets doing the same thing over and over.
And again, for our viewer, we're going to get the Democratic perspective later this year from a Democrat, California State Senator. John, a couple more things to talk about. A lot of policy change in California regarding, let's say, climate change, green energy, electric cars, gas stoves, the going green, as it were. It seems that in California, it's so politicized. And to me, again, my gauge, my barometers when I'm out there every day in the streets, in the field, talking to so many people, I mean, hundreds of Californians a week. And they're saying, listen, David, I mean, we can't pay for our meals. We can't pay for our mortgage. We can't pay for our rent. We can't pay the gas in our car. And they feel that Governor Newsom and California Democrat leaders are sort of really disconnected, that they're putting a priority on climate change policy. Not to say we all know that there is climate change, there is somewhat of a warming of the earth, and that we have to take things seriously. I remember as a kid in LA, I was in elementary school and middle school. We couldn't go to school. The soot in the sky was so bad in West Los Angeles. You couldn't see the Hollywood sign. You couldn't see the tall towers in downtown. You couldn't see the Santa Monica Mountains. You couldn't see the Hollywood Hills. In 1990, in the early 90s, when I graduated college and I leave for 10 years to report all over the United States, and I get back to report in LA, the sky is clean. You can breathe. Your lungs aren't burning. You can go for a run. So kudos to the then AQMD, now SC AQMD, South Coast Air Quality Management District, and all the environmentalists who help clean the air. But with that said, again, the pendulum has swung. Now that is about the only priority in California today, or at least that's what I'm being told. Can you talk about that? And again, we're going to get the Democrat perspective on this later this year.
The issue is disingenuousness, or maybe even dishonesty. When we talk about renewables, mostly we talk about solar and wind, but hydro is renewable, and so is nuclear, but they're not included in the definition. So you have, say, Central California, which has to build solar farms and wind farms, and has to raise rates for electricity to residents in the Central Valley, which is a lot of farm workers with low incomes that now have to pay higher electric bills to subsidize a technology that what do you do with old solar cells, and where do what landfills do you put the old turbines in, and oh, and by the way, you actually do need some oil, some oil and gas to run these machines and keep them fine-tuned. So it's sort of been an out of balance kind of discussion that could be better addressed. When we see it, at least when I'm in Sacramento in the summer, when you have 100-degree weather day after day and you don't have enough renewable energy or clean burning fuel generating electricity plants, and that you have to buy all your electricity from neighboring states that burn coal, and so it's sort of like you're transferring your green energy mandate, but you're paying for it and somewhere else. I think it's funny that we sit in California on so much oil and yet we're shipping it from Saudi Arabia, and those transporting boats are spewing out more in carbon. You know, it does. You know, there's got to be better balance, a little more forethought, a little better central planning, if I could even use that word, on how you're going to go about addressing climate change. And I think California is more showmanship than leadership.
Former California State Senator John Moorlach, thank you so much.